Data scientists are hot in 2024, and with the terabytes of data generated every day by big and small devices, the field of data science is also growing every day. But what is data science? Wiki says that data science is about statistics, which in itself is about collecting, organizing, and presenting data. It uses advanced computing capabilities, which already implies involving digital stuff like computers and programming. It continues to say that data science is used to extract knowledge and insights from data. And I'm going to show you an example of this. I want to know my expenses per month, and I want to show my biggest expenses. So there is the insight part. Now comes the data part. I have two bank accounts, one at the Trust Bank and one at the Python Bank. Both banks let me export a CSV file of my statements. Now I have to figure out what data to extract from them. And here comes another important part of data science: domain knowledge. I have to understand the problem I'm trying to solve. For example, to group the expenses by month, I need the month part of the dates. And I have to understand how to filter the lists to only get expenses. But this will be different per bank. The Trust Bank has separate columns for debit and credit, and the Python Bank uses a single column. And then it uses negative amounts for debit and positive amounts for credit. And there is a technical difference between the files. The Trust Bank uses commas to separate, and the Python Bank uses semicolons. Oh, and of course I also need to merge these into a single list. As you see, I will need technical and domain knowledge. And in the end, this knowledge is used to create the visualization that is needed to get an insight of the expenses. So in this tutorial I'm going to use Jupyter Notebook, and as you can see I've already created a notebook and there are two CSV files. So in the notebook I know that I'm going to do something like import data. I need to filter so I only get the expenses. And I also need to map stuff because I know that some of the CSV files have two columns where I have to convert this to one single column. So importing, filtering, and mapping. And then finally we need to do some visualization. So let me start by importing one of the CSV files. I'm going to use the built-in CSV module for this. And create a new list for all the expenses. So I've opened the Trust Bank CSV as a file, and I'm going to read it with the CSV module. Now by default, the CSV module will read using a comma as a separator. So let me check what I have here. Oh, the Trust Bank does have commas as a separator. But still I'm going to explicitly tell the reader to use commas. Let me check the file again. And as you see, we have a header here. So I'm going to skip the header. Okay, now the cursor in this file is at the second line. So now I iterate through the rest of the reader. Now I know that each line has 4 columns: date, description, debit, and credit. Now just as a test, let me print what is in the description. I use Shift-Enter to execute the cell, and that works. So at this point, I want to check if the debit value is greater than 0. Since the file, of course, is a text file, I need to convert the debit to a float for this and check if it's greater than 0. Then I know that this line in the CSV file was actually a debit line. If that's true, I will append it to the expenses, and each list element will be a tuple of the date, the description, and the debit value. So let me check the value of expenses. I execute the cell again, and I typed a bracket too much, and there we go. Now let's see if these indeed are all debit values. Yep, because in the original file there was, for example, this salary here, and this should not appear in this new list. And that works. So what I did here is already I imported data, I filtered data to only get the debits, and I also mapped it because the new list has one column less than the original list. Now I will open the other file for the Python bank. Now this time, let me check. This time the separator is a semicolon. And as you can already see, this structure here only has a date, type, and one column debit credit for both positive and negative values. For example, here you see grandma's present, that has plus 100, and all the other ones here have minus. So the delimiter is a semicolon. And I'm going to skip the first line, which is the header. And I will iterate the rest of the lines. And here I will just get 3 unpacked values per line. And this time I check if the amount is less than 0, then it's a debit value. And if that's true, I will add it to expenses. And again, I will use a tuple to create the same structure. And since I want all the debit values as positive values, I will use the absolute function, and then I will convert the string to a float. And let's see if I have enough brackets. I think so. So when I execute the cell, yep, those are more values. Let me check if one of these values is actually in here. For example, the dance class. Let's see if I have that here. Yep, there is the dance class. So what we have done now is we took 2 CSV files, we filtered them, we mapped them, and we merged them into one single list of only expenses. And that is the first step that we promised to do here. And of course, we used our domain knowledge, which is some kind of knowledge of how a bank statement works with debit values and credit values, to actually create the structure we are looking for. So already many knowledge came together, like technical knowledge and domain knowledge, to create the list we can now use to work with. So at this point, we need to insert another step which is actually to group the data. And the first grouping we're going to do is group data by, let's say, the month. This is to create the bar diagram with the 12 months in it, so I can see when were my big expenses and am I going up or going down. So I will create a dictionary where each key is the month and the value is the sum of expenses from that month. I iterate my new list. And the first thing I need to do is get the month from the date. Now, in my case, that is really easy because if I look at the data, I will just split the month on dashes and then take the middle element. So I split on dashes and take the second element. Now I check if this element is already in the expenses by month dictionary. If it is already in the dictionary, I add it to the value from that key. And otherwise, I just create the key with that amount. Okay, let's see what we got here. I execute the cell. And yes, that works. There are 12 keys for each month with the value, with the total of that month. Now I will do the same for the description. I create an empty dictionary. I check if the description is already in the expenses by description as the key. And if so, I add the amount to it. And otherwise, I create it and initialize it with the amount. Let me check if this works. I execute the cell. And yes, there it is. Everything is now grouped by description. Okay, that brings us to the last part of this tutorial, which is the visualization. So for this, I'm going to use matplotlib, and I need to pip install this. And I'm actually going to do this on top of the notebook. I execute the cell, and I let it run. I only need to do this one time, so when it's done, I'm going to collapse the cell, and that's it. I import from matplotlib. And I need data for the x-axis and for the y-axis. On the x-axis, I will put these labels. And I'm going to use some list comprehension to get the keys from the expenses by month dictionary. And the values. And the values I extract from the result of the values method. So let's actually check if that works. So let me check labels, comma values, and I execute the cell. I execute the cell and nothing happens. Let me check, let me run all cells. And there we go. We indeed have 12 months for the labels and then these values, these amounts for the values. Let me show them in a bar chart. The labels, comma, the values. And then I call the show method to actually show the bar charts. I execute the cell. And yes, that works. Here are the 12 months with the amounts. August was a big expense month, probably due to the vacation. Okay, that's one chart. The second one will be a pie chart. And here I want to see what my big expenses are. So what I do is I create new labels. And this time I'm going to take the expenses by description. And I do something similar for the values. Okay, well, I'm pretty confident that that will work. So I will again use the matplotlib library, and this time I choose a pie chart and I pass the labels and the values, and I will call show and I execute this cell. That does not work. It could be that the pie chart expects different values here. So I've seen a variation on this where I first pass the values and then I say that the labels equals my labels and I execute it again. And that works better. So we can now get a good feeling of the biggest expenses. Well, actually, it's not that clear because all these small expenses are shown. We could even say that we will only show, let's say, the top 5 expenses and then group everything else under miscellaneous. So how would we do that? Well, first I need to sort on expenses. So let me sort by the amount. So how do I do this? I need to sort by the expenses by description, which is a dictionary. So I'm going to take the keys and values, and I'm going to say that it needs to sort on the value, which is the second element. Let me see what that does. So I get a sorted list indeed, because here this rent, which is the biggest value, is now at the bottom and the smallest value is at the top. Okay, so that works. So now the data is sorted by amount. And what I will do now is I will take, let's say, the biggest 5 expenses, which will be sorted by amount. And I use some list slicing. So let me see what this does. Yep, those are the biggest 5 expenses. Good. Now I take the rest, sorted by amount, and again I use list slicing. Let me print this. Yep, that works. So now I have 2 new lists, one with the biggest 5 and one with the rest. And what I need to do is I need to sum the rest. So let me create the total of the rest, which is the second element for x in the rest. Let me see if this is actually a number. Yep. And of course I need to add this now to this big 5 list, which is a regular list. And I'm going to put a tuple in it where the first element is the label. So I call it miscellaneous. And the second element will be the total rest. Okay, well, let me show if this works. Yes, so now we have 5 biggest expenses and then the rest under miscellaneous. Very nice. So the only thing I need to do now is again create a labels list, and I'm going to take the first element, which are the labels from the big 5 list, and I do something similar for the values, but this time I take the second element, also from the big 5 list. And now I'm ready to plot it. Again, I take a pie chart. I'm going to pass the values, and the labels are the labels. And I show it, and I execute the code. I made one mistake, and that's this one. I used a square bracket. I use a round bracket and try again. And there we go. Now we see the 5 biggest expenses, and the rest is here, nicely grouped under miscellaneous. Very nice. Perhaps you have noticed that I did not use NumPy or Pandas for this tutorial. The reason is that the tasks at hand could easily be programmed with plain Python. Once things get more complex, you might want to check if these libraries support this out of the box. For example, one thing I like is how Pandas can deal with cleaning up noisy data. And to see how that works, click on this video. There you learn how to clean up incomplete rows and columns with Pandas.